Hi, everyone. I'm Scott Branley.
And I'm Alicia Coakley. Every member of the church has a story to share, one that can instill faith, invite growth, and inspire others.
On today's episode, we're going to hear how one man's struggle with millennials leaving the church led him on a journey to find a cure. Welcome to Latter-day Lights. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Latter-day Lights. We are so glad you're here with us today. And for the first time ever, we are really excited to introduce a guest from overseas, from London, right? Or next to London, Charles, is that right?
On the Welsh borders, 3 hours from London, but
3 hours.
It's in the south, yeah, South England.
Awesome.
And I would just like to say, y'all, we are international. I'm so excited. It is so awesome. Charles actually reached out to us. Charles, how did you come across our podcast?
So I went searching for these experiences to hear the voices of those that were fellow saints, and soon came across yourselves, and I've enjoyed many podcasts since.
Awesome. Well, we're super excited. I'm especially excited. I know we had we tried recording earlier. I'm going to give you the little teaser to the listeners here, and we had a little bit of a mishap, so we're redoing it now. We haven't actually got too far into the recording process from the last episode. So, but I had mentioned, y'all, I am terrible with anyone that has a really cool accent. And so I can barely understand Southerners, and I grew up in the South. Michiganders, that's another hard one. Canadians, but we got Charles who speaks proper English. You know what I mean? So this is going to be really fun for me. I might just have to sit here and just smile and be like, I don't know how to do this. It's going to take me a second longer to understand everything that's being said, because I am uncultured, and that's terrible. And I want to be better. So, but I'm excited. I'm super excited.
We won't hold that against you, Alicia. It's okay.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. So Charles, this is exciting. Tell us what life is like on the other side of the ocean. What do you do for a living? Tell us about your family.
So I'm an investment manager by trade. I've been in the sort of looking at predominantly the UK, but very much of American and international equity markets. I do that for a living, but I'm also a convert to the church. I was raised in the Church of England, and had a brief spell in a Canadian university, which I very much enjoyed, a 4-year stint in Toronto. Came back and married a wonderful woman, 6 children later, and no more hair. But otherwise life is good. And so that's in a nutshell, that's who I am and where I'm from.
That's awesome.
Too funny. I've said it before, so I'll say it again. My dad, he is also without hair, and he says that only the most perfect heads are bald. That's the reason why they're bald, is to show off how perfect they are. So,
well, it's funny that
Scott's on his way. You're there.
I'm there completely, and I there's a sort of restoration of times. You're thinking, actually, I'll keep the. I don't really want my hair back. I'm happy the way it is. It's a lot easier in the morning, Scott.
Right? And when you sit under a light, it just looks like you have a halo already, right? It's perfect.
Very good.
Awesome.
Funny stuff. Cool. Well, I don't know if people caught the intro there, but we talked about how Charles went out looking for a cure to millennials leaving the church. And the reason why we say that is because he wrote a book called The Millennial Shot. Mm-hmm. So, and he's got this fun, you kind of play on the whole doctor getting an injection, right? We're really excited to hear your story, Charles, and how that applies to your journey.
Sure.
So why don't we give you the floor and have you share that with us?
Perfect. So let me. My story starts really when I was 19 years old. I was very much a Christian, raised in the Church of England. and had the opportunity of a stint in Canada. And it was while I was there, I came across a school teacher. I was a supply teacher at a local school just north of Toronto. And this school teacher and I would spend many an hour in a pub of all places discussing the gospel. And he wanted to become a full teacher, and so he really knew his stuff. And it was wonderful grounding to further develop my Christian faith. And but shortly after that, like many, I went through university, lost my way a bit spiritually, and but 5 years later altogether, I came to the UK and started work and hadn't really given my spirituality the time it needed, but I always recognized God was there. He was a little bit inconvenient, to be honest, and with the sort of expectations and all that was required of what I felt of me at the time. And so, in a word, I felt that life was going on, and I enjoyed it, and I loved my sort of canoeing in Canada and everything else. But anyway, had to come back to the UK, start work, and cracked on. And within a year, I got invited to attend a very prestigious rowing event called the Henley Regatta. It's an annual event just outside London. It takes place on the River Thames. Very competitive rowing. And it was while I was there at the weekend, I met this beautiful girl across the dance floor. I was far too frightened to go and talk to her. I wasn't I'm not a member of the church at this time, in the LDS church. But in a somewhat inebriated state, still felt too much of a chicken to approach her. But in any event, long story short, I did eventually sort of pluck up the courage to have a brief hello, and we got talking. And that night, at sort of 2:00 in the morning, I managed to borrow one of these little rowing boats and rowed it down the river. Early romantic time, which was quite amazing. It was great fun, and that started a relationship that culminated in getting close to the point of engagement. I then chose to go back to Canada for a sort of a canoeing trip, and she was an Australian, and she was on her way back to Australia, and I was about to throw this all away, and it was while I was back in Canada on the canoe trip that I realized I'm about to be a huge fool, and when I came to myself, I realized that this relationship is worth fighting for, and I need to make the sacrifices. I was one of these guys who didn't want to be pressured into marriage, but realized actually, having time to reflect, that actually this was a huge thing I was going to pass up on. So the canoe trip finished. I was still in Canada at this point, and I took the first opportunity to walk 2 hours while some of the other boys were doing a canoe shuttle to retrieve various vehicles. After sort of a 2-week canoe trip, it was a fair, had a huge amount of time to do this. I walked 2 hours to a payphone, and was excited to say, Michelle, I've changed my mind, and I'm about to be a big fool, and I really don't want to do that. And let's get engaged. So, so excited to do this. And anyways, this is in the era before mobile phones. And so walked all this way, the hot sun, made huge sacrifices to get 2 hours to a payphone. It was in the middle of nowhere, this trip. And to find that there was no answer. And I was devastated.
Oh, no.
So it was such a big letdown, and I anyways got back to England. We met up, I poured my heart out to her and said, let's, don't go back to Australia. Anyways, we shortly got engaged, and excited again to share this with my parents at the time. I drove out and was excited to reveal to my parents that I had got engaged, and they were horrified. They were horrified.
Oh no.
Michelle she's an Australian Filipino, and they the first thing that Mum does is she grabs me by the hand and says, "Is she pregnant?"
Oh no.
Wow.
Now it's worth the Michelle's very important to the story, because she had she would say for a dysfunctional. She was raised in a dysfunctional home, and then in Australia, and at the age of 18, recognized herself that she needed structure, she needed order in her life, and LDS missionaries happened to knock on her door at the perfect time, and she was fellowshipped and brought into the church with an aid of particularly one good friend, and so Michelle was a member of the church at this point. I wasn't. She didn't pressure me at all. We got married, and my parents, we reconciled things eventually, so that was a good thing. And we got married in the Church of England church, and we recognized the agreement we had, we would worship together. So we started worshiping together in the Church of England. Michelle, being very patient, she was. Recognized that I needed that sort of time. And after 6 months, she said, "Well, we've had a nice time worshiping together at the Church of England. Let's come to my church." So my first experience in the LDS church, I was sort of sitting there and not knowing how things were going on, and the bishop taps me on the shoulder and he says, "Brother, I'd like to hear your testimony." And I, not knowing anything at all, I know, as I said, I sort of said, no problem. I said, no problem at all. Anyway, so my very, very first Sunday in the church, I'm sort of invited to the stand, and I say to the congregation, I say that I'm not a member of your faith, but I'm intrigued. I'm open to learning. Treat me gently, and let's see what happens. And they did. It was a ward in London, Wandsworth Ward. They're wonderful people, and it was that was my very first introduction to LDS, the LDS Church. So far so good. But then the missionaries' discussions started, and I'm being in this story, and I was wanting proof. I wanted to have evidence of all sorts of things in the Book of Mormon, and Michelle, being the kind of soul she is, said that you need to feel the Spirit. It's not simply a sort of facts alone will not lead you to the faith that you require in really understanding the gospel of Jesus Christ. And that was quite an eye opener for me. And the missionaries had given me this little book, a little sort of army version of the Book of Mormon, and I had this on my commute into London. And one time I was reading the book, and I was about halfway through the Book of Mormon at this time, and I was in a busy commuter train, but very early in the mornings, no one seems to be talking. But the train was absolutely packed, and it was a beautiful day. We were just coming into London Waterloo, and I decided to pray about the Book of Mormon, and it's most incredible what happened next. I had never had an answer to a prayer like this. It was the experience I received. I will take it to my grave. I had an answer from God. I was not anticipating what I had this incredible still small voice absolutely testifying to me that I was to keep reading, and in time I would learn. I would sort of would come to myself that to know that the book was actually for true. One can anticipate a yes or a no or whatever, and I just did not anticipate this answer. I fundamentally believe it came from God, and I was just in this realm. It was just felt. I didn't want to get off that train. It got into the station, and I was so mesmerized by this experience that I'd had an answer from God that it absolutely, I felt sort of overwhelmed with the peace and the stillness that voice gave to me, and I absolutely cherished that experience, and subsequently came to know for myself that the book absolutely was of God, and shortly after that, I was baptized.
Wow, that's incredible! Such a cool thing that you're surrounded by people, but God is speaking to you, and that's a cool visualization.
You're right, Scott. It is interesting, isn't it? It absolutely packed train, It was really, and I hadn't had that sort of experience before. It was extraordinary, and as you say, packed with people and yet silence. It was a piercing, it was incredible how God can reach out to us, and so when we reach out to Him, I think it was a wonderful, reaffirming, embryonic LDS testimony to me that yes, God could individually, personally reach out and answer my prayers in quite such a dramatic and distinct way that it really was wonderful.
So cool.
That's awesome. So what happens next?
So what happens next is I get baptized, and then the old sort of English jokes come, because there's one or two friends and family come to the baptism, and I'm dressed in white, and they say to me, "What number are you batting?" In reference to sort of a cricket joke, and
okay.
And sadly,
cricket players wear white, right?
They're all white, yeah, absolutely. Well, they were white at the time. The game's moved on. The modern cricket game is definitely different, but back then they all wore white, and
okay.
And so it certainly it was when sadly one of my parents and close friends thought I was joining a cult, and I remember my mother turning to me thinking, what's going to happen to all your drinking friends? Are they going to still be your friends, sort of thing? And I said, well, this is important to me, and I recognize some sacrifices are, but if they're really true friends, then
they're still going to be your friend.
They're still my friends, exactly. And so that was there's a sort of a transformation there, and it wasn't easy with the sort of wider friends and family to some extent, but they and my parents particularly were suspicious that sort of what was I doing, what was Michelle doing, dragging me away from their faith, and but over the years they've come to see the way we've raised our children and the values we stand for, and they have definitely softened, no question, in their approach, and they appreciate that actually the values and things that we learn and hold dear have been good for us and good for our children, and so to that extent, awesome. It's been there's definitely been a softening of our approach, so that's been good.
Cool.
And I too have grown. I recognise that in my early LDS days, I might have sort of been a bit more sort of wanting to convert them, but I recognise too that, and I think this is an important message I've learned in terms of interfaith dialogue, that I totally respect their faith, and I've loved it I loved it for me for the time that I was in the Church of England. And I loved it still. My mother, my dad has sadly passed, but my mother is deeply in Church of England, and I love what that church has done for her. So we can all reach out to God in different ways, and I totally respect what the Church of England has done for her and for me.
That's cool.
So the children grow up at this time, and we have young Arthur, who is our youngest of the youngest of six. He's at the age of about 1.5. He has a fit that causes a seizure, and this is a real worry. We call the ambulance, and he's sort of rushed to hospital, and this is a major concern. And he's fighting for his life at this point. It's a real worry, and all the children are, the eldest is around 12 at this point. And so you can imagine, this is a Sunday morning. We get, fun enough, getting ready for church, and boom, this absolutely completely just out of the blue, it just hits us. Mm-hmm. And and Michelle is, think that, obviously she wants to go to Arthur, but she doesn't want to leave the rest of the children. And so it's agreed that I'd go in the ambulance, take up with Arthur in the hospital, and she'll be with the children. Well, so what happens is that I've left. I'm in the ambulance. The blue lights are on, and that's we're blue lighting all the way to our local hospital. And Michelle, at this point, the house goes quiet, and she's looking around for the children. She can't find them, and she sort of calls out, and no answer. So she goes looking, and she eventually finds the children all together in a circle in prayer. And she just looks at them and thinks, this is, it was a wonderful reflection of the fact that, what the church has taught us, things that have been taught in the church and hopefully echoed in the home. And something so that what did the children knew that what could they do? Well, they knew that they could do something. They could gather together in a circle of prayer. And it was a very moving and learning experience for us as parents to appreciate that that the children would do that. And it was so that and their prayer was answered. And Arthur did recover, and so we're blessed to have him. He has tuberous sclerosis. And but he was never had another fit since, and so we're ever so grateful for that, and grateful for that the faith that the children have shown. So that's so that's all. It's all roses and light so far. It's all, but the story's about to change. But so what happens next is that the children get older, and our second son Oliver runs into a hard time. This is now he's of 18 years old, and he sadly discovers friends on the wrong side of town, so to speak, and he's in the drug scene very full on, and doesn't come home, and is spending a ridiculous amount of money on drugs, and we find it incredibly hard to reason with him, to have any sort of conversation. And of course we get it back in the face that it's sort of the church is this and the church is that, and really I'm very keen to reaching out to him, saying, son, this is, yes, we love the church and we love what it stands for, but we are beyond that. We want us to be decent human beings, and want to raise you and all of children in a way of, in just to be good people and hopefully be happy and enjoy life. Ignoring, we're not insisting on the children being, temple worthy and nice that it would be, and right. All are in the church, and we've never insisted on that. We've made it very, very clear to them that our love for them is absolutely unconditional. And but of course you can't. Someone in the middle of a sort of serious drug problem, you can't reason, you can't engage in that sort of conversation, and so sadly he's drifting away from us, and clearly away from God, and this is a really desperate and difficult time. And what happens is that he runs out of money. And so he, in a really desperate position now, he comes to us and clearly wants more money, wants more drugs, and et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
And we come to a sort of a deal with him, and the deal is that he spends some little bit of time away from Hereford, where his sort of drug friends were, and within a short period of time, he's agreed to go on a 6-month placement to Africa, just to sort of volunteer and get away, just escape really, and sort of come to himself. And that was a wonderful experience for him. It changed his life, and got him to recognize what's really important, and remove himself from the drug scene, and that was it was a joy for us to see him not come back so much to church, but to have him again. He was lost to us over that period, and so a real joy. So that was a real roller coaster, a test of faith in many ways, but also recognizing that he and also his sort of church colleagues at this time are beginning to drift. Our son Oliver was particularly dramatic in his, but others, I was serving as the branch president, young men's president, and various different things, but close to the youth, particularly the young men that I was, devastated that these youngsters were sort of growing up and growing out of the church, and my own children, but many more, and it got me thinking and reflecting on sort of, well, what were the reasons? I'm fully aware, as we all are, that there's sort of a wider, typically a fall away as people get into their teens and early 20s. Mm-hmm. But this was particularly acute when, at a time, when we're talking now about 15 years ago, perhaps, when the 10 years ago, these youngsters were growing up in the church. They were searching for answers on all sorts of church history issues and various other things, and they weren't getting the answers. They weren't either taught the answers at church, or many instances, arguably, including myself, the leaders didn't have all the answers for them, or even weren't prepared to embrace these issues, and they were often batted off with sort of, well, read the Book of Mormon, or we'll cover that subject another time, or whatever it may be. And so, and others were too frightened to ask.
So can I ask, Charles, can you give us an example of some of the things that you heard that were issues, things that they wanted to know more about?
Yeah, they wanted to know more about Joseph Smith's polygamy. They wanted to know about the church finances. They wanted to know about why was the priesthood ban in place for so long. Why was the church so hell bent on all these commandments and the strict obedience issues, and what about the role of women and all sorts of issues? But but particularly, I think that's of the church history, the fact they weren't taught in seminary that, for example, that Joseph Smith had a sort of polygamous relationships and the like, but then the internet was sort of fairly, reasonably, things were the church, to an extent, hadn't really embraced these issues. The gospel topics essays weren't available, and even if they were, well, they weren't. But I mean, it certainly wasn't discussed, and it was considered sort of anti-Mormon literature, and so there wasn't an easy avenue for these youngsters to find these answers, other than the random selection of the answers that were available on Google at the time. And of course, us as parents and leaders, typically older, weren't as savvy on the internet as these youngsters, and they were getting answers that often took things out of context.
Well, because we know that anything that you read on the internet has got to be true. That's what Abraham Lincoln said.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely. But at least you can sympathize with them in as much that, but back in the day, there was nowhere else. And
right.
They weren't, this, if you wanted to find out, that this is sort of where one would go. This is, and so it's not an unreasonable thing for millennials to search for answers. And so
right.
did.
And with us being in that age of information, I think that's one of the things that, millennials kind of started that age of that era, right? Where it's like, hey, like we need to know all of it. I think our older generations, we kind of did a lot more just faith-based and, we would learn as we go type of thing. And we didn't really get hung up on things. But I noticed even my kids are like Gen Z and Gen Alpha, and I don't even know all the generations now, but millennials definitely started that like, hey, that quest for knowledge, right? Like they wanted to know so much before making a decision on anything, and I think that's like one of the big reasons why they were saved to come to earth at this time, right? Is because Heavenly Father knew that he needed them. He needed the ones who were going to be thirsty for the knowledge, because we were going to get so much of it in the last days, right? So yeah, not faulting them at all. But
no, absolutely
definitely
true.
not. I can see how it would be frustrating for them not being able to find answers other than, whatever was out there on the internet.
Exactly, absolutely. They were so used to, in the day, we'd go and buy whatever item of clothing, whatever it is, and but of course within seconds they can find price comparisons and this and that, and have the same expectation for retrieving any sort of information from any, and so yes, so and I was beginning to witness this, and I was particularly frustrated when one particular youngster, relatively youngster, who was sort of 21 sort of thing, turned to me and mentioned one of the, not Emma Smith, but mentioned one of the wives of Joseph, and I didn't know who she was, and I prided myself on a sort of a historian, recognized I thought I did reasonable amount of due diligence when joining the church, didn't feel I was sort of completely in the sort of cloud cuckoo land, but that took me by surprise. I hadn't, even myself was not aware. And recognized, hang on a minute, that was a little bit of a wake-up call. I said to myself, I need to do a little digging here, to find out for myself, not by way of wanting to dig up dirt or just sensationalize difficult issues, but recognize these were genuine reasons why millennials were leaving the faith. And if I'm close to the millennials, as I absolutely feel I am, as in this particular generation that I was sort of young men's present to, branch present, etc. I love these guys and girls, and I was just so I wanted to find out for myself, really, on their behalf, what could I, and recognize that I was becoming, unlike, I've had years of experience at this point in sort of Christian understanding, and on top of a sort of an LDS conversion. So what could I read this material in a faith affirming way, but giving it absolutely full credence, if so not just skimming at the surface, but recognizing a deep dive was necessary to give this material, proper justice, and so I did that, and then that's the sort of how the concept of my sort of research led to a prompting, which I am ashamed to say duly ignored. Sometimes I think the Lord can prompt us, and I did receive a prompting to do something about it, but I did nothing. I ignored it and had a second prompting, and again I did nothing, and the third time I then saw a pattern and looked back and reflected. Hang on a minute, yes, the Lord is I feel reaching out to me, and I'm not I don't consider myself an author. It's not something I inspired to do. But I felt passionately about this particular subject, and the Lord, I absolutely believe the Lord reached out to me and said I needed to write a book. And an incredible thing happened at that point. When I made that commitment, I truly believe, here I am. I'm dyslexic. I'm no ambition to write a book or anything else. An incredible. The Lord reached out to me and answered so many prayers that very, very quickly things fell into place that I was to receive, I believe, the right information, the right way, in the right time, that made for a very efficient accumulation of data and resources and structure that ultimately came, that accumulated in the book. That is the millennial shot, a spiritual inoculation for the modern Latter-day Saint.
I love the name.
I love it. It's so good.
and perhaps I can just touch on things that particularly resonated with me. So that, for example, I've long felt that judgment was one of the big issues and reasons why people feel judged and misunderstood. And the data comes from a survey that was done a little while ago now, about 5-6 years ago, for about 600 people that have left the church. And wow. I've been on that data. And the top two reasons why people were leaving, one of the top ones was people felt judged and misunderstood. And that was my experience too. When I joined the church, sorry, I hadn't joined the church, beg your pardon. When I was getting married, one thing I failed to mention was that Michelle's church friends, almost all of them, chose not to come. Why?
Really?
Because she was marrying the wrong kind of Christian.
Wow.
So that did not endear me to the LDS Church at all.
Right.
As you can imagine. So it was a tough. So I felt judged, but anyways, the point is that we can learn so much from that, and I talk about this in the book, using the parable of the prodigal son, and the fact that in that parable, Jesus addresses his audience are sinners, arguably the younger brother in the parable, and Pharisees, arguably the older brother in the parable, and how that parable plays out, and how the older brother, how he reacts to the younger brother coming back, is rather clearly judgmental, and how we can deal and overcome and see the elder brother, or what I'd like to describe the Pharisee in me. We can. There's so much that we can learn and apply in our own lives, but not just simply casting stones at others, but recognizing that that arguably within our faith, and we're not within many faiths, there are plenty of elder brothers around, and we need to tolerate and learn from that. And I think that's part of our faith journey. It's not to ideal. It's not to live to live with real people, not ideal people.
Mm-hmm.
So that's sort of, and appreciating that and learning that is one way I think we can overcome judgmental issues, and which is one of the leading issues.
And it's not to say that everybody is judgmental, right? Like we definitely have people in the church, just like any other church or job or school or wherever else, where there are those cultural norms to be very, just kind of like selective, but in a very unchristlike way, right? Where like they think they're doing something good, but really they're going about it just the wrong way, right? But then there's other people who feel judged, not because of the actions of someone in the church, but because of maybe what they're doing themselves. And that's the Holy Ghost trying to talk to them and tell them, hey, like, let's talk about the atonement. Let's learn, let's grow, So it's hard because you want to, I mean, regardless of whether they really are being judged or whether they just, are dealing with their own personal issues that make them feel like they're being judged by others. It's hard, and it's a really sensitive subject, I think, sometimes to approach, because you want to acknowledge those emotions and those feelings. You want to make sure that you're validating that person, but at the same time, understanding that like we're always going to have bad feelings about something, like none of us are perfect, right? And Satan, the minute that he senses any type of trepidation or doubt or fear or concern, he is going to gnaw on that like a dog on a bone. Like he is just going to, right? Like he's just going to get in our head, and he's just going to he's going to put a spotlight on every little example for why it is that you're feeling this way. That's negative, anything he can do to keep you away. So that's a tricky thing, but that's interesting that was the number one reason why they left, right?
Yeah,
it's just because they felt like they were being judged or
misunderstood. Exactly. And I think, there is the way to overcome that ultimately is for us not arguably to sort of wrap our youth around a sort of cotton wool, and have a sort of very tight, close knit sort of church member only environment, but actually to educate them and give them experiences whereby they're learning a broader sense of social, cultural, friendship groups that can deal with a multitude of different situations, that they can become far more tolerant of different people and experiences. And I think that's really important that we recognize that. And I'm hoping.
Well, we had when I was a ward missionary or whatever, our focus theme was love, share, invite. And I loved that because I was like, and that's the way it should be done in order, right? Like first you love. Then you can start sharing a little bit more about the gospel. And after you share, you can start inviting people, inviting people to join you and inviting them to kind of figure it out for themselves too. But I love that there's been this shift over the years because of hardships that millennials and other people in the church have gone through, right? Where we've seen where we could do better. And when we had that problem, Heavenly Father was able to guide us and be like, there's a better way. Okay, now you're ready for it. There's a better way.
Alicia, do you remember, since I'm just recalling as we're having this conversation, but I remember 5 or 6 years ago, I don't know if it was our city or our state, we started having multi-denominational Christmas events where other churches would come together, and we would put on a church program about Christ. And then this Boy Scouts, I've shared this on another podcast, but the Boy Scouts started doing what they called the 10 Commandments hike here in Ogden, and we'd go to 10 different Christian churches, and each church would share one of the commandments, but the kids could ask any questions about that church. And it really opened up the dialogue and showed you that everyone, all of those different denominations were really trying to follow the commandments and follow God. Right. But we do get stuck in in our own little world, and we want to protect it because it's so special to us. But sometimes we almost keep people out of it, and a lot of it's unintentional. But we do need to make a much better effort to open that up and to really accept other religions and interact with them, because ultimately we do want the same thing. We want to follow Christ. We want to keep the commandments. We want to do what's right.
Yeah.
So I really love your insight there, Charles.
It's so important, and it's frustrated me. So here I am as a convert. I'll just share this little story. I'm taking young men to the stake center for like a priesthood preview session, which I'm sure you sort of have something similar over there. And anyways, this stake young man present grabs one of the deacons, and he brings them out, and he says, "Snoggins, when you're going to get the priesthood, you're going to have more authority than the Pope." And I absolutely, what are we teaching these young men? It drives me absolutely nuts. And I can't help thinking that, in terms of interfaith relations, in terms of arrogance, that Christ teaches us to become humble. And what are we doing? The arrogance in that, and it feeds this concept of this sort of one true church, which is another main, not number one, but it's certainly one of the main factors that sort of millennials have fallen away. And again, I just don't think it's healthy. So that's that's an issue that is important. But perhaps coming on to another main issue in terms of number one, just ahead of LGBTQ issues, is church history, and not so much church history, but the fact that church history wasn't taught. The distrust that the millennials have in understanding or being taught church history. So that is one that I'm again feel very strong about, and then we need to understand context. We need to understand a whole range of factors, and sadly, of course, some of these millennials don't have the time, inclination, or experience to look in perhaps the right way, and you get a few answers on the internet, or you get these rather powerful YouTube videos that are made in a way that sort of, as Brian Hales would say, sort of like a line of breadcrumbs can sort of lead people. You get a truth, and then bam, you get something out, sort of a fact that's twisted, and then you play on that twisted fact, and you take people in a very different direction, and all of a sudden you've got a very powerful video that actually can lead people in the wrong direction. And so I feel empowered to try and set context to these difficult issues, and they're not always easy, and the recipe doesn't necessarily come in a 2 or 3 minute soundbite, but they can absolutely be understood and overcome, whether it be polygamy or polyandry or blacks in the priesthood or however, but it takes patience and faith, and the right context, and I do think that we owe it to the next generation, and also the millennials that are willing to engage to give them the right answers in the right way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely.
It kind of reminds me of that. Of course, we're going to have mistakes, right? Of course, we're going to have things that were done wrong. Like, the Lord never required us to be perfect in order to preach His gospel, and He still doesn't. Thank goodness, because it would not ever get done. You know what I mean? There was only one perfect man that walked the earth, and even in the scriptures, you have all of this history of people. Think about David, for example, right? Like, David was favored of the Lord. Like, he had these great experiences. He was super spiritual. And yet, you know what I mean? David did some pretty screwed up things, didn't he? But but it didn't take away from the good that he was doing either. And I think that that's one of the things that we're learning now in this generation is that we can take the good and the bad, right? And we're in a place where we can actually acknowledge the ugly church history, right? We can acknowledge that. We can learn from it. We can grow from it, and we can let it be part of our testimony too, of how much Heavenly Father loves us and how much he is willing to work with imperfect people, you know?
I think that's beautiful. I know I like that a lot. And, I've come to learn that important that the church is for me, and it's been fantastic in my, hugely supportive. And I love the church, but I don't go through the church to access Christ. The church enables me, supports me in my direct relationship with God. Mm-hmm. And when I find the difficulties with one or two current or past issues with the church, that way that I've framed that there for me allows me to recognize, as you've eloquently put, Alicia, there are, when we come to murky difficulties or issues with prophets or local leaders or whatever it may be, whatever the issue comes, if we frame that the church is an enabler in our direct access to God, I think that if we can easily reconcile the fact that, yes, as they say, mortal men have made mistakes and will continue to make mistakes, and that forever thus.
Right.
But, so these issues are important to me, and perhaps one other thing one I would mention was particularly topical. Was the concept of obedience. For a long time, I felt like sort of young women would come to church, and they were constantly told to keep the commandments. Mm-hmm. And then they'd go to these dances, and were told the dresses are too short, and they should wearing 2 earrings, not 1, and all this sort of stuff. And I think that it's important to recognize, and I've come to recognize that, of course, we need to keep the commandments, but if we understand the scripture properly and read it in its fullness, it says, "If ye love me, keep the commandments." So there's an invitation there. Wow. To love first. And then if we love him, then we consciously are then choosing to keep the commandments, as opposed to being beaten up. Keep the commandments. And so I think the narrative in that is important. And I'm all for empowering our youth to understand the right order of things and recognize the invitation to follow Christ, as opposed to being beaten into submission until you do.
Right.
It clearly doesn't work.
Great insight.
Yeah, I love that. This, again, especially millennials and the younger generations and stuff, they definitely need more, they need more praise, right? Like, everyone jokes about millennials, right? I've done it myself. They do need more praise because they are much more complex, I think, than what we've been. And they are also being raised in a different environment than any other generation in history has been raised, and so they have a lot more struggles that are new. Yes, we have the old stuff. We have the, pornography and drinking and drugs and promiscuity. And we have all of those standard sins, right, that we have to deal with. But they have a lot of emotional, social, mental struggles that I don't think they just weren't as prevalent back in our day, and especially not in generations older than us. And so I think it's really, I love that you've taken the initiative to sit down and to write a book that addresses these issues that are specifically affecting a lot of the millennials and the youth of the church, right? Things that they're meaningful to them, right? And because they're just in those stages of getting their own testimonies and learning their own faith and branching away from their parents and grandparents and siblings, and they're trying to figure it all out, I think that it's awesome that you have taken it upon yourself to be like, hey, okay, you've got issues. Let's address them. Let's acknowledge them. Let's see where we can find a starting point, and then we'll just baby steps our way up to a point where you're actually strong enough to go and to look into this kind of information for yourself without losing your testimony. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I ask lots and lots of questions. 350 questions are in the book.
Wow.
But I don't profess to have all. I don't provide carte blanche answers. I hope to provide insights so people can ponder and reflect and come to their own, things about, their own reasoning. But there is a danger in being so certain about many aspects of faith, and so I think it's helpful to provide insights, but I don't claim to have all the answers. These aren't always easy, but it's a fairly light-hearted read. It's not I'm not a theologian. I don't provide. This is written for, to be an easy read. It's written for the millennial generation, and so it's designed to be sort of understood within that context.
Yeah. So is it a question and answer type format?
No, not at all. It's more. It takes these issues and seeks to provide. I do lean on quite a lot of non-LDS material because I think that's important, and we know that we don't have a monopoly on truth, and I think it's important to bring that into the conversation, and I think we can learn from other faiths, and so I don't hesitate to do that. But at the same time, I love the LDS Church and true to it, and don't so that I like to think there's a balance in approaching these issues.
Yeah, definitely, absolutely.
It's interesting, Charles. We've kind of gone down similar roads because I wrote a book called Faith to Stay, and my experience was similar. When I was a bishop, I had 2 families leave the church, and the reasoning was a lot of the doctrinal issues that they weren't aware of when they were growing up, just because of the narrative that was shared before the internet. And I don't blame the church for that, because it's hard to tell the story of the gospel and church history to millions of people. You have to have some overarching story. But for some people, finding this new information is hard. It can shake your testimony. Yeah. And in my experience, these 2 families left largely because of that. And so that led me down a journey to find the answers. And so it's cool that you kind of took a similar journey to help find answers for people.
I did, and it ultimately, having addressed the top 10 issues, I couldn't leave it there. My personal faith journey through this has been so faith affirming that I had to write a final chapter, which I call From Believing to Becoming. And in that, I talk about my experience in being my motivation. What is the motivation for faith? And I think it's important for us to ask that. And one of the parables that does that quite well is the parable of the workers in the vineyard, where you may recall there are workers that are hired at different times of the day, and they're all promised a certain wage. And at the end of the day, the master of the vineyard, Christ, will gathers up the workers, and those that came last got the full day's pay, and those that came earlier were rubbing their hands, thinking, "This is marvelous. We're going to get more." And lo and behold, the master of the vineyard, true to his word, gives them what he said he would give them, which happens to be the same amount as those that came, towards the end of the day.
Right.
And it's a really, really interesting parable if we think about it, because I would argue it plays on what Peter asked the Lord at this parable, which is, what's in it for me? Peter asked, essentially. And we might ask, what's in it for us? And when we come to reconcile that we're not in this sort of church to do a whole lot of LDS chores and then turn to our maker and say, "You now owe me." But actually, if we think if our motivation is more about pleasing God and forgetting ourselves in that service, then I think we're just a little bit closer towards a Christ-like love than we might have been without it.
Right. So I have to ask, Charles, how has your testimony changed or grown in this process of, finding answers, finding different perspectives, I guess, in regards to the tough topics with church? So
it has grown enormously, and I've come to move my faith to one where I feel I'm trusting God. And for me, it's about a relationship with God. And in any good relationship, the best relationships that we have, right in the center of that is trust. We don't have good relationships in this life without trust. And we need to trust God. And I've come to do that. I think I'm humble. I'm fallen. I'm a sinner. I fall short in so many ways, and thank goodness for His grace, love, and understanding and patience with me. But I've learned to lean on Him, trust Him, and through Him, I think I'm just a little bit better for it. And that has been it's wonderfully faith affirming.
Wow. So can I ask you, what kind of advice would you give to anyone, not just millennials, not just the youth of the church, but to anyone in the church who might be struggling with some topics? What would you tell them? What would you advise them to do or to remember or whatever else?
So I think it's remembering that our local and our leaders are far from perfect people, and we're here to we are on a journey of learning, and faith is recognizing that the wrestle isn't something that we do in 5 minutes or 5 years. It's a lifetime, and and that's not to say that we should never get so certain and so comfortable in our faith. I don't think that's expected. I think a journey of faith will always require faith. It doesn't. We don't get to be so certain that's not the plan. The plan is for us to still have faith and lean on our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. We never get to be so good that we don't need Christ. We'll always need Him, and we should always love Him and recognizing that trying to live the perfect life and feeling very guilty isn't helpful either. It's recognizing that trusting in the Lord, leaning on His good grace, the atonement of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, and coming to understand the power in that, believing not just in Him but believing Him, believing His message, is powerful and faith affirming, and I think that's vital as we all hopefully learn and grow together towards Him.
Oh, I love awesome. That. That's
really I hope that we can meet someday, Charles. You're
I would enjoy that. Scott.
Amazing man, and this has been a great time to be able to share with you.
Yeah, we can go rowing, and I'll be the person with the air horn yelling at the house. What's the word they use? Is it push? What is it? What do they say? I don't know. There's
Oh, with the
you're the
loud
you
one?
could be the cops.
Yeah, with the megaphone. With the
yeah, with the
megaphone.
megaphone.
In the back
Yeah, yeah. Go,
Real
row.
hard.
I don't know.
I want more.
Yeah.
Exactly. That'll be
Awesome.
awesome.
Well, Charles,
Oh, man.
how can people find your book? Where?
Yeah.
Thank
Do
you
you have
for
a
asking.
website,
So it's on Amazon. The Millennial Shot: A Spiritual Inoculation for the Modern Latter-day Saints. It's on. It's hardback. All profits from the book will go to supporting interfaith relationships and healing the difference between the former and current members of the church.
Awesome.
That's amazing.
And it's also it'll be on a Kindle version as well. Is out.
Oh, perfect. You got to put it on Audible for me.
There is an Audible, but Audible is coming. I am doing an Audible.
Is it coming? Good.
It's a few months away, so.
Oh, good.
Yes, there will be an audio version. Yeah.
Are you
Are
gonna
you
read
recording
it?
it? Yeah, that's what I was just gonna say.
I'm in two minds, but I think it has to. I think I'm gonna give it a go. Yeah.
Yeah, you should.
You should. You should.
The accent is so cool. Yeah, you got to do
It is
your own.
so
Audible.
intriguing. Oh, for sure. For sure.
Okay.
I will be the
Thanks
first
for
person to
support.
download that. You tell me, hey, it's fun. I'll be like, okay. That's awesome.
Great stuff.
Wow.
Excellent.
Well,
Lovely
this
to
has
be
been
with you both.
wonderful. Yeah.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
all right. Thank you.
absolutely. I had one quick thought that I had wanted to share. I can't remember who it was, but someone in my life at some point had told me to just keep in mind that whenever we have those moments of doubt, right? Whenever we go on these journeys where something comes up that makes us question our testimony, that it's really important to remember that life dulls spiritual experiences, right? And so if we can hold on to those spiritual experiences that we've had, if we can hold on to the memory of the light that we had already received, and remember that we all have at least a part of our testimony that's strong. And maybe the only part of your testimony that's strong is that something is bigger than us, right? Maybe you don't even know about a heavenly Father for sure, or Jesus Christ, or the atonement, or that, Joseph Smith was a prophet. Maybe you don't know any of those things, but hold on to what you do know to be true. Latch on to that, just don't ever let go of it. And don't let the little things in life that pop up here and there, and they will pop up. Like if they haven't, they will. Don't let those things become so dark and heavy that they squash out any of the light that you've already received. And ultimately, I mean, I really loved in Scott's book, the way that he kind of like, I don't want to ruin too much, but he basically kind of asks the question, like, it kind of all comes down to either there's a God or there's not. And then you can go through this whole process, and so I would highly encourage, our listeners to go ahead and to reach out to get your book, to go through and to read it and to fortify their testimonies and stuff and be ready to have those hard conversations. I think that we could definitely have with millennials. And then as soon as Scott's book's out, go get his book. Because I think that they're just going to make a perfect pairing.
Charles and I we'll do a double book.
Yes,
combo.
like a set. It'll be perfect.
Yeah, great stuff. Very good.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I love that. So
Thanks, Alicia. And thanks, Charles, again for being on the show.
Not at all. My pleasure.
If you guys want to be on the show, if you have a story that you'd like to share, or somebody that does, please don't hesitate to go to latterdaylights.com and fill out the form. Let us know your story and let's get you on the show. And you can be as cool as Charles. Maybe you're overseas. Maybe you're even in another country.
That's where it all goes wrong.
Yeah,
I
like
know,
we're
right?
expanding. We're expanding worldwide here. So
there you go.
Well, it's an honor to be your to wave the British flag, and thank you for putting up with me.
To wave the British flag at all of us treason folk, right? No, we love it. We love it. So that's been awesome. I don't think we asked. I think we forgot to ask you, Charles, do you have any last thoughts before we go?
I'd just like to support your comment there, Alicia, about holding on to what you do know, those cherished moments. I think that's really important. It's an important insight, and to lower one's expectations of perfection, and just recognizing that we're all on a journey of learning. And you might look at people on the stand or someone who's been in the church for 25 years and you might think they know an awful lot, or they're very good people, or whatever it is. And I just think it's important. We are on individual faith journeys, and we lean on the church to support us, and by so doing support it in a communal effort to come unto Christ. And I think that's important.
Awesome.
I love that. Awesome. All right. Well, to our listeners, thank you guys so much for tuning in. Please be sure to share. Say that 10 times fast. Do your little 5-second missionary work here, and share this episode. Share the link to Charles' book. We'll have that in the description for everybody. And go ahead and comment to us. Scott and I would love to hear your feedback. We'd love to hear what was your favorite part of this episode. What kind of questions would you have for Charles? Charles, I'm sure that you can get on there and read any comments and give your insights and stuff to anybody who might be having a particular struggle on something. And, do that, because the more we spread light, guys, the happier, the more peace, the more love, and the more understanding that's going to happen in our world. So, like I said, be sure to like, share, comment on these episodes. And like Scott said, if you have a story you want to share, head over to our website, latterdaylights.com, and let us know. We'd love to hear from you.
Yep. Yeah, thanks again, Charles, and we will talk to everyone next Sunday. Have a great week.
Great stuff.
Bye.
See you now.